They were kings, poets, and emperors, men whose names once seemed eternal. They ruled vast empires, wrote verses that outlived them, and believed they had touched immortality. But behind the silk curtains of their palaces moved a silent killer, invisible, patient, and merciless. Syphilis, a disease that crept through royal bedrooms and changed the course of history. It stole the minds of emperors, drove poets into madness, and shattered dynasties that had seemed unshakable. From Vienna to London, from Isfahan to Lisbon, the story repeated itself again and again. Power, passion, and downfall. This is not a story about medicine. It is a story about human weakness, about how the brightest and most brilliant men of their time were not destroyed by war or betrayal, but by their own desires. It all began in a bedroom. Vienna, 1678. The halls of the Habsburg were bathed in the golden glow of candles. The air trembled with the sound of violins and laughter. Here, in the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, Joseph, the eldest son of Emperor Leopold I, was born. From childhood he was full of life, tall, with golden curls. He rode horses like a god of war and danced at balls with grace. His eyes shone with adventure, and his heart was full of passion for women. The imperial court was filled with progressive ideas, but Joseph's bedroom became a place of intrigue, where noble women and maids competed for his attention. His mother, Empress Eleanor, watched anxiously as her son's recklessness threatened the dynasty. At the age of 21, he was forced to marry, hoping it would bring him to a more responsible life. The choice fell on Wilhelmina Amalia of Brunswick-Lüneburg, an intelligent and pious woman 5 years older than him. Before the wedding, she was subjected to a humiliating examination to confirm her ability to bear heirs. It was a cold reminder that for the Habsburgs she was only a means for the continuation of the family line. The first years of their marriage seemed happy. Joseph admired Wilhelmina's mind and beauty, and she gave birth to 3 children, including a long-awaited son. The court breathed a sigh of relief, believing the dynasty was safe. But happiness was fragile like glass. The death of their infant son broke their bond. Joseph, tired of monogamy, soon became bored with family life and threw himself into new passions. His friend Count Lamberg arranged secret meetings with peasant girls during hunts, and noble women themselves sought his attention. The scandal began when Joseph made Countess Pfaff his official mistress, shocking conservative Vienna. The whispers at court grew into loud accusations. Joseph was destroying the dynasty. Amid these pleasures, behind the silk curtains, Joseph contracted syphilis, allegedly from the gardener's daughter, whose innocence was only an illusion. The illness stayed in his blood for years, unnoticed. But Joseph, blinded by passion, passed it to Wilhelmina. The pious empress, unaware of the real reason for her suffering, believed it was divine punishment. She prayed every night, holding her rosary, while her body weakened and her hope for another heir disappeared. Syphilis made her infertile, depriving the Habsburgs of a future. The court whispered that the empress was cursed. The fate of the dynasty now rested on Joseph's younger brother Charles and his wife. But their only son also died in infancy. In despair, Charles surrounded his wife with paintings of strong men, hoping it would inspire the birth of a boy, while doctors prescribed fatty food and wine, which led to obesity and addiction. All hopes melted away. Joseph, meanwhile, ignored his mother's pleas and his wife's anger. His health declined. Headaches, weakness, and sudden fits of rage became frequent. The court saw how the once bright prince turned into a shadow of his former self. In 1705, Joseph became emperor, but his reign was as chaotic as his personal life. The War of the Spanish Succession drained the empire, and his actions were impulsive, driven by emotions or illness. By 1711, syphilis had destroyed his body, and he died at the age of 32. On his deathbed, tormented by fever, he swore loyalty to Wilhelmina, but death did not allow him the chance. His irresponsibility destroyed not only their marriage but also endangered the dynasty. Before his death, Joseph signed the Pragmatic Sanction, allowing his daughters to inherit the throne if Charles had no sons. This decision later caused a European war. Joseph left the empire on the edge of ruin, and his story became a warning of how passion can destroy greatness. John Wilmot, Earl of Rochester, a poet consumed by vice. London, 1660s. After the dark Puritan years, England burst into celebration once more. Charles II regained the throne, and London became an arena of theater, writing, and debauchery. The streets echoed with laughter, the taverns were noisy until dawn, and the royal court shone in luxury. Into this storm of pleasures was born John Wilmot, the second Earl of Rochester, whose life would become one of the main symbols of the age. Born in 1647 into a royalist family, he inherited his title at the age of 11 and became a ward of the king himself. At Oxford, where he entered at 13, John was considered a prodigy. His intelligence amazed professors, and his charm impressed young aristocrats. But university life became his first school of vice. Nights in taverns, first affairs, the first cups emptied to the bottom. His grand tour of Europe, a traditional journey for young noblemen, became not only an introduction to Enlightenment thought, but also a descent into the dark alleys of Paris and Venice. In brothels and taverns, he most likely contracted his first venereal diseases, but this did not stop him. Returning to London, Rochester became a star at court. His poems, witty and graceful, spread through salons, mocking everyone from arrogant lords to the king himself. His satire was like a dagger, sharp, shining, and dangerous. But his life consisted of more than poetry. Wine flowed freely, women followed one after another, and his quick mind made him the soul of every gathering. Charles II, who also loved pleasures, saw a kindred spirit in him and urged him to marry the rich heiress Elizabeth Mallet. But Elizabeth's family refused to agree to a marriage with such a scandalous man. Rochester, not used to rejection, planned her abduction right from a London street. A daring plan worthy of his character. The kidnapping failed and he was sent to the Tower. To redeem his guilt, he went to war against the Dutch, where he showed great courage. Under bullets and cannon fire, he saved his comrades, risking his own life. Returning a hero, he won Elizabeth's heart. They married and had 4 children. But family life was only a short pause in his stormy fate. Rochester joined a group of libertine nobles whose motto was rum, women, and poetry. Their nights were an endless celebration. They raided taverns, fought duels over mistresses, and wrote verses that shocked and fascinated society. Rochester started an affair with Nell Gwynn, an actress whose charm and wit made her a star of the stage and later the king's mistress. He supported another actress, Elizabeth Barry, who gave birth to his daughter, but he left her when her fame outshone his own. His jealousy was as strong as his talent. His satires became sharper and more dangerous. A play mocking the sexual weaknesses of Charles II became the last straw. The king expelled him from court, but Rochester was not discouraged. Under the false name of Dr. Bendo, he pulled off one of the most outrageous pranks in history. He went around London pretending to be a doctor who treated female infertility. Sometimes he even dressed as Mrs. Bendo to examine patients in private. His fraud was clever and convincing. Women believed in his miracles, and many became pregnant after his treatments, most likely by the doctor himself. But the shadow of syphilis was already following him. The disease, contracted during one of many nights of pleasure, slowly consumed his body, but he either did not notice or refused to see the symptoms. By the age of 33, syphilis had destroyed him. His once handsome face was disfigured. His nose had collapsed, his skin was covered with ulcers, his vision dimmed, and his body was tormented by convulsions. He lost control and his once brilliant mind became clouded. Friends abandoned him, lovers disappeared, and even the verses he dictated in delirium lost their former strength. In 1680, blind and helpless, he died at the age of 33. His short, dazzling life burned in the flames of vice, leaving behind poems that still echo with his genius and self-destruction. Rochester became a warning that even the brightest stars can fade if they are driven only by passion. Rudolf of Austria, Prince of Mayerling. Vienna, 1858. In the shining capital of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Crown Prince Rudolf was born, the son of Emperor Franz Joseph and the freedom-loving Empress Syphilis. His birth was a celebration. Cathedral bells rang, and the court was filled with joy. This boy was destined to inherit the Habsburg throne, one of the most powerful dynasties in Europe. But fate prepared not a crown for him, but tragedy. His childhood soon turned into a nightmare. At the age of 6, he was separated from his beloved sister Gisela and placed under the care of General Leopold Gondercourt, a man whose methods were as harsh as the winter wind. The general hardened the boy, waking him at night with pistol shots, pouring cold water over him, or abandoning him alone in a dark forest. These trials broke Rudolf's spirit. He grew up anxious, impulsive, and deeply wounded inside. Empress Syphilis, learning of the cruelty, intervened and managed to have the tormentor removed, but it was too late. The damage was done. The trauma of his childhood left Rudolf vulnerable to depression. He sought refuge in books, alcohol, and political intrigues against his father, whose strict control he felt was suffocating. As a young man, he dreamed of reform, of freedom for the empire, but his ideas drowned in the indifference of the court. His life became a constant balance between the duty of a crown prince and the desire to rebel. At 23, in 1881, Rudolf was married to Princess Stephanie of Belgium, a 17-year-old girl with a cold expression and a rigid upbringing. The marriage was purely political, and Rudolf did not hide his disdain. At their first meeting, he appeared together with his mistress, shocking the entire court. After the birth of their daughter, Elizabeth, in 1883, he completely withdrew from his wife. His life turned into a whirlwind of restless nights. Cabarets, brothels, wine, and morphine became his constant company. It was during those years, in the arms of one of his countless mistresses, that he contracted syphilis and gonorrhea. The illness followed him like a shadow, but he did not realize he had passed it on to Stephanie. The young princess suffered in pain, while the court doctors, trying to hide the disgrace, deceived her, calling it a stomach infection. When the truth came out, it was terrible. Syphilis had caused the infection and made Stephanie infertile. The dynasty lost the hope of an heir. Humiliated and furious, Stephanie broke all ties with her husband. Rudolf, tormented by guilt, sank deeper into darkness. His depression grew worse, and alcohol with morphine only made the storm inside him stronger. By 1889, Rudolf had become a ghost of himself. Syphilis was consuming his body, and his mind hovered on the edge of madness. He was obsessed with death, seeing it as the only way out of his pain. He proposed to his mistress, Missy Casper, that they end their lives together, but she, horrified, refused and even warned the police. Her warning was ignored. No one could believe that the crown prince might truly mean it. Soon Rudolf found another companion, the 17-year-old Baroness Mary Vetzera, a young aristocrat madly in love with him. Her eyes shone when she looked at the prince, but she did not notice the darkness consuming him. On January 30th, 1889, tragedy struck at the Mayerling hunting lodge. In a cold room lit by dim candles, Rudolf shot Mary and, a few hours later, took his own life. Their bodies were found the next morning. She lay on the bed, and he was beside her, the pistol still in his hand. The court was horrified. To cover up the scandal, a false scene was arranged. Mary's body was secretly placed in a carriage, propped upright with a broomstick tied to her back to make it seem she was still alive. She was buried quietly in a village cemetery, and the official report stated that the crown prince had died of a broken heart. But all of Europe knew the truth. Illness and madness had destroyed the future emperor. Rudolf's death left Emperor Franz Joseph without an heir and brought the empire closer to its downfall. His story became a symbol of how personal demons can destroy an entire dynasty. Abbas II, the Shah of Persia in the shadows of the harem. Persia, 1632. The Safavid Empire, once the brightest star of the East, was entering decline. Wars, corruption, and internal conflicts were eroding the foundations of the empire. In the midst of this turmoil, Abbas Ferru, son of Shah Safi, was born. When he was only 9 years old, His father died, and the boy ascended the throne under the watchful and suspicious eyes of the court. They expected him to become a puppet in the hands of the Grand Vizier. But Abbas proved to be far more capable than anyone imagined. In 1547, with an iron will and a mind sharp as a blade, he carried out a palace coup, overthrew the vizier and seized power for himself. His rule began with hope. Abbas was a reformer. He fought corruption, strengthened the borders, and skillfully avoided conflicts with the powerful Ottoman Empire. His victories over the Mughals in the east and the Russians in the north restored Persia's pride. He was fair, a rare quality for his time. The peasants felt protected, and his tolerance toward other faiths earned him respect even from his rivals. Persia seemed to stand on the threshold of a new age of prosperity. The court was full of admiration, and merchants and poets praised the young Shah, whose charm and energy fascinated everyone. But Abbas had another side, dark and insatiable. He loved luxury. His palaces were draped in silk, his tables overflowed with rich delicacies, and his feasts became legendary. Wine flowed endlessly, music filled the halls until dawn, and dancers with graceful movements entertained his guests. A golden goblet decorated with rubies, a gift from the Russian Tsar Alexei Mikhailovich, became the symbol of his passion. Abbas raised it high at his feasts, proposing toasts to eternal joy and celebration. But when the empire's economy began to weaken and new threats appeared on its borders, the goblet lost its charm. Abbas sought solace in pleasure, turning to the company of captive women brought from the conquered Caucasus. These women, whose lives had been destroyed by war, became his escape from the burdens of rule. Surrounded by silk cushions and the smell of incense, Abbas lost himself in indulgence, unaware that disease had already entered his body. Syphilis, contracted during one of those nights, hid in his blood like a predator waiting to strike. Abbas, blinded by desire, did not see that his empire was slowly falling apart. The treasury was empty, his ministers were losing confidence, and enemies along the borders were growing bolder. By 1666, Abbas, still only 34 years old, had become a shadow of the ruler he once was. His body was tormented by the pains of late-stage syphilis. His once clear mind was clouded, and his strength diminished each day. The court whispered that Gorgon had become a nest of disease, poisoning not only the Shah but everyone around him. Abbas, once a reformer and leader, now avoided his ministers for weeks, lost in apathy or fits of madness. His golden goblet, once the symbol of glory, now gathered dust in the corner, while his empire slipped into chaos. That same year, Abbas died, leaving the throne to his son and an empire divided and weakened. His death was quiet, but its consequences were loud. The Persia he had dreamed of reviving was thrown into disorder. His life, which began in triumph, ended in warning. Even the greatest ruler can fall when his soul is ruled by vice. Abbas too became a symbol of how fleeting pleasures can destroy a great era. Luis I, the philologist king of Portugal. Lisbon, 1838. The Atlantic wind carried the scent of salt and freedom through the royal palace. In the age of Romanticism, when poetry and music flourished across Portugal, Luis Pia, the second son of Queen Maria II, was born. He was never meant for the throne. That responsibility belonged to his older brother, Pedro. Luis was as free as the ocean breeze, and his heart belonged to books. His library, filled with the works of Shakespeare, Dante, and Goethe, was his fortress. He translated the plays of the bard into Portuguese, dreaming of making them part of his nation's spirit. His mind was sharp as a quill, and his charm drew people like a magnet. Luis was a born flirt. His smile and quick wit captured the hearts of court ladies, actresses, and singers from Bohemian Lisbon. His love affairs became the subject of gossip, but he always returned to his books, where he found true peace. His life was peaceful and full of art. He wrote, he loved, and he lived freely, untouched by the burdens of the crown. But fate does not ask what one wishes. In 1861, an epidemic, perhaps typhus or cholera, swept through the royal family like a storm. Within weeks, It claimed Pedro and his two younger brothers, Fernando and João. The Braganza dynasty stood on the brink of extinction. At 23, Luis, the poet and scholar, was taken from his quiet world and forced onto a throne for which he was unprepared. Portugal demanded stability and heirs to continue the line. In desperation, Luis wrote to his relatives, Queen Victoria and King Leopold, pleading for help in finding a bride. The choice fell upon Maria Pia of Savoy, the 14-year-old daughter of the King of Italy. Her youth and innocence delighted the court, and their wedding in 1862 was a celebration of flowers, silk, and public joy. Maria Pia fell deeply in love with her handsome and intelligent husband, seeing him as a hero. By the age of 18, she had given birth to two sons, Carlos and Afonso, and it seemed the dynasty was safe again. But behind the facade of happiness, a storm was brewing. Luis could not let go of his freedom. His affairs with actresses, especially Rosa de Lima, a star of the Lisbon stage, became the talk of the city. Maria Pia, devastated by his betrayal, sought comfort in her travels across Europe. Rumors began to spread that she, too, had found lovers to avenge her humiliation. In this whirlwind of scandal and passion, Luis contracted syphilis. The disease hid in his body for years, waiting silently to strike. By 1887, syphilis had reached its final stage, neurosyphilis. Luis's once brilliant mind began to fade. He forgot the lines of Shakespeare and confused the names of his ministers. His moods swung between depression and bursts of anger. Migraines tortured him, and convulsions weakened his body. The court tried to hide his illness, but the truth began to leak out. The king, once the pride of Portugal, was becoming only a shadow of himself. In 1889, at the age of 50, Luis died after nearly 20 years of suffering. Portugal went into mourning, but the royal dynasty again stood on the edge of ruin. His life, which began as a poet's dream, ended as a tragedy, and his downfall became a reminder that even the brightest minds are not protected from darkness.